institutes that philosophy within the department, then I think that the employees will follow.
All right, Sheriff Philp.
You know, I would agree that I think most officers, you know, having an outside group of people evaluating, you know, their performance in these investigations and reading out discipline would be looked at negatively and would have a strong impact on morale. I think it's very important that we have this oversight, and we have to conduct it with our employees as administrators. I think it's how you go about it, and I think it can be done and be done effectively without independent bodies.
All right, Chief Nielsen.
Well, as I'm finding out very clearly, police officers are very resistant to change. And I think the only hope for success of something like this is a cooperative effort. Law enforcement officers in this state are extraordinarily well protected in their rights, and not without good reason. But I think that there is hope for a meeting of the minds, and I think Christina said it well. You know, it begins at the top, and it's in how you and the confidence that the head of the agency demonstrates in whatever system is put into place.
Thank you. All right, the next question, we'll start with Bob. How can we hold an officer or officers of the law accountable for abusive or harmful treatment of innocent citizens?
It depends on the context. One of the things I became an advocate of in Santa Cruz, because there were questions about the ways that officers were enforcing the law with transients that hung out on Pacific Avenue, which was the main drag, and one of the comments that I made was, if you want to have adequate oversight on Pacific Avenue, buy about 10 video cameras and give them to people to videotape. I mean, a videotape is a powerful answer. It's not dispositive in all cases, but as an individual citizen, that's what it comes down to, because short of that, at best, it's your word against an officer's word what occurred. And if everything else is equal, that case comes out not sustained.
All right, thank you. Next we'll go to, let's see, where am I? Sheriff Philp. How can we hold an officer or officers of the law accountable for abusive or harmful treatment of innocent citizens? How can we feel protected when, in fact, we as people are often being mistreated and unrightfully harmed if other officers are witnessing this abuse while merely standing by?
Well, I would hope that if something like that was occurring and we received a complaint, and we would investigate it as thoroughly as possible. And of course, as was mentioned, I mean, it's simply an evidentiary hearing. I mean, is it one person's word against another? Are there other witnesses? Those type of things all come into play. Assuming that it was proven that that was the case, then it's incumbent upon us to ensure that we correct that behavior and impose the appropriate discipline and corrective measures, so that a change is effected. You know, they're all done on an individual basis. I mean, someone makes a complaint and we have to investigate it to determine the facts of the matter, and I would hope or think that people would come forward and tell the truth. That's a basic assumption that you hope for.
You didn't give me the whole question.
Well,
I want 15 seconds to say one thing which is critical.
Sorry.
The Rodney King incident, what is so fascinating to me was that there were a dozen officers that stood by and watched and didn't intervene, and they were from 4 or 5 different agencies, not all LAPD, and I would argue those were the most important people at the scene.
All right, Chief Nielsen, could you respond to these two questions?
Well, I think that the way we hold them accountable is by being consistent in the standards we set for them, the expectations we set for them, day in and day out, and how we model those expectations. From my perspective, I think it's absolutely incumbent upon us that in every instance of an allegation gets a fair hearing, but we have to look at it from an evidentiary point of view, and and that means interviewing the witnesses and finding out to the best of our ability what the most credible version is. But I mean, it's a day-to-day holding your people accountable for the expectations you have of their behavior, and it's consistency.
Thank you. Barbara?
I could talk a long time on this one.
We're getting
I think
short of
that
time.
I think that consistency is important. I think that supervision in a police department is very important. Supervisors know who's treating the public well and who is not. I think you need to look at whether officers are getting multiple complaints. I think that it's difficult to prove them. Often, as Bob said, it's one-on-one, but you have other things to look at. Whose story is consistent? Whose story is consistent with, if it was a force case, whose story is consistent with the injuries to the person? I think that there are a lot of ways you can look at it. People have talked about the value of duplicate investigations, a review board investigating in the department. In Berkeley, they had someone looking at the PRC's investigation as well as the internal affairs investigation. This person said that often she couldn't tell they were the same case. Often people will talk to civilian investigators when they won't talk to police investigators. Often we talk about the allegations differently. So I think it's a complex question.
Thank you. Christina?
Well, I would say that there's a huge assumption that people feel safe going into the very law enforcement agency that caused the harm to complain. People don't trust the internal review process. So I have not a novel or a new idea. We could have effective citizen review board.
All right. Well, we have many good questions left, but I think it's 9:15, and if we give you each 3 minutes for your closing statements, there is one that you might address in your closing statement to get one more question in. What is the next step in making police videotapes public record? Is it legal for a citizen to video or traffic stop, arrest, or raid? It's an interesting sounding question, but we'll start the closing statements with Sheriff Phil.
Certainly. I guess in reference to your last question, the point of the matter is that there is a lot of current law involving videos that are in the possession of law enforcement governmental agencies that restrict what can be done with them. And we've gone through this in the past in other instances, as far as a citizen videotaping an activity, we always just tell them, as long as you are back far enough that you aren't interfering with the officers, then you have the right to be there and to videotape. It's a free country. So as long as we're not talking about them being in the officer's way, actually causing them a problem, and being respectful of that distance, then videotape away, and nobody should be trying to stop you. I guess it's an old saying that we talk about, or I tell my staff a lot of times that my mother used to tell me, if you don't want me to see it on the 6 o'clock news, then don't do it. That's the best way to look at it. I said before, I think from in my perspective that our profession can arguably be one of the most complex that there is. It's basically, we have a series of incidents that our officers go through every day, thousands of incidents that have thousands of permutations. There's never any incident that's the same the next time you do it. We also deal with people that you may be the nicest person in the world, but we train our officers in officer safety techniques and their tactics.